Hello, Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. I am here with Laith Marouf of Free Palestine TV for the latest episode, Canada and Palestine, the War on Zionism, episode 28. Laith, thanks for being here as always.
Good to be with you, Aiden.
All right, Laith. Well, despite what some people would say, the resistance is far from dead. So let's get into what I'm sure will be a busy episode. So Yemen, they've been striking targets in Israel, right? But also they've been facing this kind of Western proxy, these attacks in terms of Sana'a. So can you talk about the situation for Ansar Allah?
Well, obviously, we heard a statement by the government of Sana'a and the armed military forces of Yemen saying that starting from the statement earlier this week, that they will be retaliating in kind to any attacks on Yemen. Therefore, a power plant for a power plant, a port for a port, an airport for an airport. And they've already delivered on that. We saw for 3 days in a row the hypersonic missiles of Yemen hitting the power plants south of Haifa and east of Tel Aviv. And we also saw Ansarullah and the armed forces of Yemen attack the aircraft carrier group in the Red Sea twice. And one of those attacks happened as the aircraft were trying to take off to attack Yemen from that aircraft carrier. That's how the Yemeni resistance is changing the paradigm. On the other side, the empire, the Zionist empire governed from DC, has right now triggered, on the one hand, the Muslim Brotherhood in Yemen, and we saw their attempt to attack Taiz city, which was repelled, and the Muslim Brotherhood forces slaughtered, basically. And then we heard statements from the Muslim Brotherhood in Yemen openly calling on the United States and Israel to attack Ansarullah, and that they are ready to basically do what the HTS is doing in Syria, which is to appease the Zionists and make deals with them and give up parts of their own country to the Saudis and the Emiratis. And one other thing that the empire tried to do was activate some sleeper cells inside Sana'a. And fortunate for the Yemenis and unfortunate for the empire, those agents that were on the ground in Sana'a were so stupid, were so dumb that were uncovered very fast and captured. We saw videos of them being paraded, these agents, on television, on Yemeni television yesterday and the day before. So this is kind of the situation in Yemen, and Yemen is not going to be an easy target for the empire because of its geography. And the United States will need to do something out of the ordinary to get to the caches of weapons or the leadership of the Ansarullah.
So one interesting element is I've been seeing talk about pressure on Egypt to actually go after Yemen, which kind of caught me off guard. So what have you heard about that?
Well, look at what the empire did to Egypt. Even though it's governed by a vassal, the Sisi regime, over the last 15 years, all the surroundings of Egypt on in Libya, in Sudan, in Palestine were lit on fire. And so Egypt, all its trade through land routes is gone. And its ability to dominate those markets, since it's the most industrialized country in the region, to make any trade, were gone. And then you had the Ethiopian vassals cut off the water from the Nile and began starvation, basically, program against the Egyptian people. And what was left for Egypt was the Suez Canal. And here you go with Yemen's engagement in the Al-Aqsa flood. The revenues from the Sina Canal collapsed. So now Egypt is on its knees. Okay, so uh, it could be coerced into a confrontation with Yemen under these conditions. But obviously the Egyptian military remembers the last time Egypt intervened in Yemen under Jamal Abdel Nasser. And at that time, basically, Egypt was the strongest Arab country and one of the pillars of the third worldism or the non-aligned movement. And the situation was flipped. Sana'a and the north of Yemen was controlled by a, a king that is appointed by the Saudis and is with the American empire. And the south of Yemen was the revolution where the Marxist uh, communist movement was gaining foothold, and Egypt sent hundreds of thousands of troops to support the government of the south to try to capture Sana'a, and they couldn't. So in today's conditions, it's the opposite. Egypt is on the side of the empire and is trying to take Sana'a from an anti-imperialist power, and the balance of power in the region is totally changed since the 1950s, 60s. So, it's impossible for Egypt to accomplish anything, really, that it couldn't accomplish under Jamal Abdel Nasser in terms of military takeover of the country. But this is what the West wants, and I don't think the Egyptian military will agree to this because it will be a humiliating defeat. Up until now, Egypt hasn't entered any wars since 1973, and the last pride of Egypt is its military, so it wouldn't want to be humiliated that way.
All right, Laith. So we've seen that Al Jazeera has been suspended in the occupied West Bank. So let's talk about two things. First of all, the impact, but secondly, the overall true nature of Al Jazeera, because people just look at the Palestine coverage and kind of forget about everything else. So these two factors, can we go from there?
Yeah, it's number one, obviously, Al Jazeera is the government propaganda machine of Qatar. It's even more so, it's foreign affairs policy of Qatar. The whole foreign affairs policy of Qatar depends on Al Jazeera. That's its only, uh, tool to project power. And so, one of the things that the empire gave as a job for Qatar since the 90s is to build this Al Jazeera network and to capture the Arabic audience and imagination and then project it also to the rest of the world. And in order to do so, the empire allowed Qatar to support Palestinian human rights, not liberation, Palestinian human rights. And that allowed Al Jazeera to capture the Arabic audience. And then all the other uh, programming and news positionality is 100% imperialist, anti-Syria, anti-republics, anti-revolutionary work, anti-progressives, and everything that the US wants. And in the situation of Palestine, it's clear that Al Jazeera has so much say within the Palestinian communities. And at this moment, uh, it may look like Al Jazeera was critiquing the collaborationist PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, and the Palestinian Authority or non-authority security forces because of their attacks on Jenin over the last week and killings of civilians by the Palestinian Authority security forces. But it's really actually a destabilization not because of the love of Hamas or Islamic Jihad or Palestinian revolutionaries, but because the what is intended to be done right now by the Zionist colony is they want the Palestinian Authority to collapse. I also want it to collapse, but they want it to so they can have an excuse to begin a program of expulsion of Palestinians from the West Bank as Trump comes in and declares the West Bank as part of the Zionist colony, Israel. They just got banned from the West Bank by the Palestinian Authority, Al Jazeera. And, you know, it's a very stupid thing to do by Mahmoud Abbas because it's just going to actually weaken him more and play into the hand of what the empire wants.
Well, Abbas playing into the hands of the empire, it's not exactly a new thing. So, look, now there's been some talk about, again, this is Zionist media, so we need to be cautious. But it was an interesting thing because it was claiming that Palestinian resistant recruitment numbers, that they're rising. Is there any veracity to this? And if there isn't, what's the incentives behind the Zionist media saying
You
this?
know, for a almost like a decade, the Zionist media um, purposefully maybe exaggerated the power of the resistance or Hezbollah or others to make their enemy a little bit comfortable, right, in their self-assessment, and then the blows come as happened in Lebanon and in Gaza. But uh, truthfully, when you go on social media and you look at the posts from people in Gaza, and I've seen this post many times, different individuals saying, before the war in Gaza, I was critical of Hamas publicly. I was for nonviolent resistance. I was for this. But now, with all my family being killed, I'm ready to pick up arms. And so the condition in Gaza, because of this out and out genocide, makes it that anybody and everybody on the ground wants to carry arms to defend their family, even if they do not, let's say, support the Islamic ideology of Hamas or Islamic Jihad, or let's say they don't support communism and PFLP, but they will carry arms for anybody that gives them arms to defend themselves. And everybody would rather die fighting than just be slaughtered aimlessly while they're putting their hand out for handouts. So it's correct. Right now, there's huge recruitments happening, not only inside Gaza, but even in the West Bank. Everybody understands that if, as a Palestinian, you are not armed and ready to protect yourself, nobody on this planet will come to your protection, and you will be raped, murdered, chopped up, burned alive in front of the whole world's cameras and all the social media, and nothing will come to save you.
All right, so now Hezbollah and the state of affairs in Lebanon. Now, I saw that you spoke with Nima of Dialogue Works. I regretfully wasn't able to catch the interview yet because it hadn't uploaded by the time I was looking. But you talked about it, so we got some stuff to talk about for sure there. Now, the state of affairs for Hezbollah, because again, it's constant doom and gloom, and look, there's reason for concern, obviously, with what we've seen. But again, I want to push. I think it's good here to push back on the fact that it's total doom. So, how prepared is Hezbollah to fight off Israel if they try to go on the ground again? Because they knocked them back before. But with some of these blows, leadership targeting, are they still in the position to do that?
I definitely believe they are in the position to defend Lebanon and expel the Israeli occupation if the Israelis decide to stay. And the biggest worry right now is the possibility of a pincer uh, from the Israelis invading from the south and the east, because the Israelis right now occupy all the mountain ranges between Syria and Lebanon, almost up to the highway that connects Damascus and Beirut. And then the other side in the north and the rest of the east is the HTS Wahhabi death squads that clearly, through all their statements over the last few weeks since they came into power, indicate that their main enemy is Hezbollah and Iran, and that they have no qualms with the American, Israeli, or Turkish occupation of Syrian land. So, uh, uh, over the last few weeks, Hezbollah had to reorganize its self, where it has its forces, what are they getting expecting as an attack, and they're expecting preparing themselves for the worst case scenario, which is that double invasion. The Israelis, as we saw, alone couldn't defeat Hezbollah. Maybe with Hezbollah being forced to spread across the whole country to defend all the borders, then the Israelis would have a better chance in defeating them. But I say all of these things. At the same time, I wanted to be very clear that Hezbollah right now has recovered from the attacks, and they have reorganized. And I believe the new leadership has different opinions. And I think also the military wing of Hezbollah is now has a bigger say in what's happening and where we're going than before.
Okay, so I mean that's quite interesting. So what can you talk a little bit about what the past dynamic was between the political military wings of Hezbollah so that people can understand maybe what this change now could look like?
Yeah, so before the assassinations and the pager terrorist attacks, you had uh, a huge person called Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah that is a political leader, a military leader, a diplomat, a religious personality, and a nationalist, yeah, a Lebanese personality that has relations with everybody. And uh, so it was much centralized around a person, and the this once Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated, and the leadership that was with him, the military and political leadership that was with him, then you had now a division of power. There's nobody that can fill all those at once, all those uh, you know, um, uh, what do you call them? All those shoes at once, right? So now what we see is that you have a new Secretary General that uh, and a new military leadership and new political voices, and they're all having parts of this power divided between them, which means that obviously the military wing has much more say, and the fact that politics have taken a step back, if you because of how the enemy has been acting, this actions on the ground, it's facts on the ground. It's not anymore diplomacy or talk that is going to decide things.
Recent events, have they impacted their relations with Iran? Are they good right now? What do you think? As much as you know.
Yeah, their relationship with Iran didn't change. Obviously, they are still the strongest resistance movement in the region. They obviously still see the Ayatollah as their religious father and figure. So that's not going to change. I think the biggest thing that we can think about in the next few weeks for Lebanon is number one, tomorrow, the 9th. of January is supposed to be the date that they elect a new president in Lebanon. We have had vacant presidency for the last 2 years, and the US is trying to push for an appointment of a president that is pro-American before the coming of Trump and before the end of the 60-day ceasefire. And I think we will see tomorrow that it's not going to happen. There's no way that Hezbollah will allow a president to come into power before they can figure out what's the outlook with a new Trump. And it's another month of waiting, and or what's going to happen with a ceasefire. So another month of waiting. So the next 2 days we have also on the agenda is the ascendancy of Emperor Trump on the 20th, and then a few days later, the end of those 60 days ceasefire. And that's those, by that date, we will know what's going to happen in Lebanon. Are we going to be back into full-out war? How is the US going to engage here? How is the US going to deal with Iran, Yemen, Iraq? All of those are questions that will weigh heavily on the situation in Lebanon.
All right, Laith, thanks there. Now we're going to shift to the Canada front. We have a situation where Canada's Liberal Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, he's signaled his intent to resign. Now, he hasn't technically resigned yet. If we remember correctly, it's that he's waiting until there's a Liberal leadership race, and then he'll step down at that point. So Parliament has been prorogued until, if I remember correctly, March 24th. And look, I mean, Trudeau was supposed to come in. His mythos was going to be, some better diplomatic relations with Iran and general progressiveness and yada yada yada. But it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened at all. And instead, we see a very forthright support from Canada for Israel's genocide. Now, we see pretension around certain votes and meltdowns and so forth, and we see certain members of the cabinet, not cabinet, of the Liberal Party being allowed to state their support for the imperial proxy, two-state solution, quote unquote, as an illusion. But at the end of the day, I mean, first of all, that two-state solution is better for the Zionists in the first place. It should be Palestinian liberation. But there's that pretension of being allowed. So, like when you were watching Trudeau come up in the liberal leadership race, right? And he comes in, he wins the election. Back then, what were you thinking around, Canada's Palestine policy? How are you thinking maybe a Trudeau would touch that, would deal with that issue?
Yeah, I mean, first thing we should probably explain to our non-Canadian viewers is that pirogue doesn't have anything to do with pierogies. It's it's a word that means that the parliament is suspended and the prime minister can rule by dictate. So it doesn't need to return to the parliament. So right now we're in a dictatorial 3 months. Um, Trudeau, when he came into power or was rising, I was laughing at that time. Obviously, I never believed in the illusion of democracy, and I didn't think that Trudeau was going to be any better. Um, and I know how Canadians, the ones that participate in the electoral system, how mesmerized they were with the return of the Trudeau era kind of situation. It's like talking about the Kennedys in the US. And obviously the history of his father carried a lot of weight for his election, or the fake history of his father, his progressive supposed father. That was actually the one that called the Canadian military on the ground in the streets of Montreal and Quebec to suppress the people. So, I didn't have any illusion. Obviously, I knew a lot of people that uh, ended up in the Liberal Party as even MPs. from my days of student politics. But even those that ended up as MPs, I knew them as two-faced snakes that will sell their mother for money, and that's what they did. These quote unquote what used to be activists in Concordia and other universities that I worked with in the early 2000s. So yeah, no, I didn't have any illusion about that, and it's exactly how I expected it, his prime ministership.
Right. So let's now talk about, you know, because the Palestine Front has been tinkered around by, I'm thinking especially of the Liberal MP like Salma Zahid, in case she actually does run for the Liberal leadership. Now, this is a long shot, of course, because you have, Chrystia Freeland, the Nazi-loving deputy prime minister. You have Mark Carney, the, big banker. And you have Melanie Joly, the foreign minister, who's been leading the charge for Canada's support for Israel's genocide, among some other smaller candidates. But do you think there's any chance that Liberal leadership candidates, one or two of them, might try to talk about the Palestine situation to leverage, Canadian liberal Muslims and try to get them into the coalition? And do you think liberal Muslims in Canada would fall for that if that was attempted?
I think that the Liberal Party and the NDP Party and the Green Party would rather lose an election than support Palestine. And that's what you saw in the United States. And this is me being generous, by pretending that there's actually an election. Uh, there is no democracy in Canada or the US. This is all theatrics. The state policies of Trudeau in terms of its foreign affairs and how it treats the Indigenous people of Canada has been the same consistent policies of the Canadian government since the inception of Canadian state. So there's no change, that there's just cosmetics of the theatrics that plays out. And looking at how Trump has said that he's going to annex Canada, Greenland, and Panama, and that if Canada doesn't join the United States, he's going to tariffs them to hell. I think maybe Trudeau is going to be the last prime minister of Canada, and or he decided to resign, so it's not registered on his name that Canada becomes part of the U.S. under his prime ministership. That he's going to leave it to Pierre Poilievre to be the one that signs off Canadian sovereignty or the illusion of Canadian sovereignty to Americans. So maybe by the end of the year, me and Jew will be American citizens. So this is what I think is going to happen.
Right. So, I mean, look, in terms of the Canada-America situation, I think it's really, really in flux right now. It's hard for me to say. I think we talked about a little bit before, I don't really trust the political elites in Canada to have any sort of competency in terms of repelling any American interventions there. But simultaneously, the illusion of sovereignty from America, again, it is an illusion. It's something our elites have allowed purposely to happen. And of course, this does get superseded by the ongoing genocide against Indigenous nations that's happening in Canada, just like it's happening in America. So that should always be very much centered in these discussions. But yeah, I mean, Trump and the empire is in its final stages, right? And it's cannibalizing. I saw people say it on social media, and I like the phrase. It's cannibalizing even its own imperial allies. It's cannibalizing them now, and that's where we are. Who knows? There might not be such a thing as Canadian citizenship in 6 months, a year, year and a half. Who knows? I I think I have to look into things more before I would say more, but that's what I'll say for now, anyways. But yeah. So shifting gears, though, we still do have more to talk about. The Canadian Medical Association. Now, they were quick to condemn the Palestinian resistance operation Al-Aqsa Flood on October 7th. But now, as Eve Engler, the author of many books on Canadian foreign policy, has written for the Canada Files, is that the Canadian Medical Association, they won't condemn the attacks on medical health care and medical workers in occupied Palestine. It's simply a disgrace, Laith. Have you had any run-ins with the Canadian Medical Association over your many years of Palestine activism and journalism?
Yeah, we over the decades, through the different organizations that I worked in on projects, sent doctors to the West Bank and Gaza prior to this war. And, every time these doctors and nurses would come back and try to report and try to move the organizations that represent them, medical organizations, to support boycott or condemnation of abuse of the medical health system in Palestine, they would be faced with Zionist wall. I think the only medical association in Canada that ever either supported BDS or spoke openly about support for the Palestinian health workers was the Nurses Union in Quebec. And it was a very strong, progressive union. And I think around 2007, years are passing very fast in my head, but around 2007, as a result of their activism in general, not only on Palestine, the Quebec liberal government uh, uh, locked out all the medical unions in Quebec and went to court and broke them into smaller unions because they were so powerful and able to affect the political discourse in the country, at least in the province of Quebec. And since that day, neither the medical associations as a whole in Quebec and or the Union of Nurses have been able to take any radical positions and or confront the government in Quebec and or affect political realities and discourses. So this is a lesson for everybody within the union work. The smaller you are, the easier you are to pick at. And I would say, look, the medical association as in Canada, it seems like it's run by fascists and controlled by fascists historically, from the days of the MK Ultra experiments of mind control that were conducted in McGill University to the, even before that, to the medical abuse of Indigenous children and the abuse of women in mental institutions in Canada until today. We still see today, for instance, doctors illegally sterilizing Indigenous women in Canada. There's a case that's running right now in court. So the Medical Association in Canada seems to be run by these fascists. And if there is no impetus within the doctors' movement themselves to take back this association, it's still going to be a tool of colonialism and oppression.
And this, I mean, this is a side thing, anyways, before we get going. But one of the problems, and it's why I think there is a real chance of, Canada getting annexed into America, is there's a lack of fight within the Canadian people, right? America is just as much of a colonial nation as Canada is, but look, because of how they came to be, right? The rebellion of in the Revolution, American Revolution, 1776, there is more of an internal spirit of, resistance, and it's not put towards good ends, right? But that is a reality that there is more of that inherent spirit. Whereas Canadians, I mean, you've seen it, I've seen it, like it's an incredible degree of apathy. And I mean, I cover the Canada-China front a lot more. And I see it there, especially because the things that are going on this front are catastrophic, are utterly catastrophic for for Canadian people. It's utterly catastrophic. And but again, there's nothing done about it. And this is where it comes in with the Canadian Medical Association, is I would love to see that change. I mean, there's doctors like Yipeng Ji. I know Dmitry Lascaris has interviewed him, Evangelos interviewed him. He's a great fighter. Much respect to him. But you need hundreds and hundreds, thousands of Yipeng Jis to make that kind of change. And in this atmosphere, having 10, 20 Yipeng Jis is a miracle, right? So I don't know where this fight's gonna come from, right? I'm concerned because I believe in the working class. I do. But where is it? Right? Where is it?
Yeah, look, the Doctors Association in Canada, I think is I'm gonna mention one more thing about them that will show you how fascist they are. Canada has a huge shortage in doctors, okay, especially family doctors. And but at the same time, it has a huge influx of immigration of people with medical degrees who have already served in hospitals around the world. And Canadian government entices these people to immigrate to Canada. And once they come into Canada, they are told that they have to retake, but by the Medical Association of Canada forces them to go to university back again and take courses of at least 1 or 2 years in the universities in Canada. Okay. And then they are told that they have to do an internship again, or what do you call it? The medical internship. There's a name for it. Residency. And then after the residency, they asked to apply uh, to the membership of the association to be eligible to work. And the association, I think, rejects something like 60% of all applicants from Asia, Africa, Latin America on purpose. That they're trying to keep the medical association as white as possible. Okay. And this is why you get in a taxi in Toronto or Montreal and you ask the taxi driver from Syria, from Nigeria, from whatever, what is your profession? What's your degree? And you will hear more than often, more than you'd expect, that these are doctors out driving taxis because of the racism within the Medical Association of Canada. This is why Canada has a shortage of doctors. And therefore, you have that again shows, you'd think that all, this medical association would be more diverse given the huge amount of immigration and the huge amount of high degrees that come from these immigrants. But no, it is the medical association in Canada that is actually forcing this shortage of doctors because it wants to stay as purely white as possible.
All right, Leif. Well, that will be the end of the 28th episode of Canada and Palestine, the war on Zionism. If you appreciate the analysis in this show, please go ahead and, if you can, financially support both the Canada Files and Free Palestine TV. If that's impossible with your current situation, please do spread the word about both of our outlets' work and this show. And Laith, thank you as always for being here.
Good to be with you. See you soon.
See you soon, everyone. Goodbye to the audience. We'll see you next week.